The lights glitter, the cameras roll, and the world laughs along. But for nearly a century, one legend's brightest moments hid shadows no one ever saw. Behind every standing ovation, there's a story only the spotlight's edge can reveal, a story of joy, longing, and unforgettable wounds. For decades, Dick Van Dyke's laughter echoed across living rooms, even as backstage whispers told a very different tale. How much do we really know about the man who seemed to have it all, the charm, the dance moves, the effortless comedy? How many of those dazzling smiles were worn to hide silent heartbreaks no one dared to speak of? Dick Van Dyke has long been celebrated as one of television's most adored entertainers, the kind of performer who could brighten a room just by walking into it. He seemed untouchable, a symbol of good-natured fun who rarely slipped out of character. But even legends carry unspoken stories, and Van Dyke's is woven with emotional betrayals, quiet regrets, and moments of pain that shaped not just his career, but the man himself. His story is one of resilience hidden beneath timeless charm, a reminder that even the most joyful souls sometimes wrestle with private storms. Take, for instance, his magnetic connection with Mary Tyler Moore, his on-screen wife in The Dick Van Dyke Show. To viewers, they were the perfect couple, playful banter, tender moments, laughter that felt like it came from a real marriage. But behind the cameras, the dynamic was more complicated. When the show premiered in 1961, Mary was just 25, 11 years younger than Dick, and at first, he wasn't sure she was right for the role. He worried audiences would notice the age gap, doubting whether the pairing would work. Creator Carl Reiner, however, had no doubts. He insisted Mary was perfect, and on screen she was. Yet, beneath that polished chemistry, Dick carried a silent crush on Mary that he never acted on. It wasn't scandalous or inappropriate. It was something quieter, an emotional pull that hovered in the background of every scene they shared. Years later, Mary half-joked that it was a terrible waste they never had an affair, hinting that the unspoken connection ran both ways. The choice to never cross that line preserved the magic audiences adored, but for Dick, it left an ache that lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. Every laugh, every look they shared on screen carried a subtle tension that shaped his memories of Mary not just as a co-star, but as a deeply admired figure whose bond with him was never fully resolved. Tension backstage didn't stop there. Rose Marie, a seasoned vaudeville performer and veteran comedian, entered the show expecting to be the female lead. She had the experience, the comedic timing, and the grit of someone who had been making audiences laugh for decades. But as Mary Tyler Moore's star power grew, Rose Marie's role quietly shrank. Lines were cut, screen time shifted, and suddenly, the spotlight that seemed destined for Rose Marie began shining on someone else. Frustrated, she confronted Carl Reiner directly, only to be met with dismissive humor. At one point, he compared her legs to Mary's, implying preference for Mary's appearance over Rose Marie's seasoned talent. For a woman who had clawed her way through the rough world of vaudeville and comedy clubs, this wasn't just an insult. It was a wound that never quite healed. For Dick Van Dyke, this shifting dynamic was painful to witness. He admired Rose Marie's talent and valued their early camaraderie, but the competitive tension slowly cooled their friendship. On screen, the laughter between them was effortless. Off-screen, it masked an air of quiet resentment and unspoken rivalry. The show's success came at a price, and some of the warmth that audiences loved was built on fragile, strained bonds behind closed doors. But long before television made him a household name, Van Dyke learned another lesson in the fragility of relationships. In the early 1950s, before sitcoms and movie musicals, Dick formed a comedy duo called the Merry Mutes with Phil Erickson. They were innovators, doing pantomime lip-sync acts that left audiences in stitches. Together, they toured relentlessly, broke performance records, and even landed a television spot and an appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. Erickson believed in Dick before anyone else did, championing his talent when the industry had yet to take notice. Then, suddenly, in 1953, Erickson walked away from show business without explanation. There was no fight, No scandal, just a quiet exit that left Dick blindsided and alone during a crucial moment in his budding career. The breakup wasn't just the end of a partnership. It was a harsh introduction to the unpredictability of trust in show business. From that point forward, Van Dyke learned to stand on his own, to carry performances alone, and to never fully rely on creative chemistry lasting forever. Even as his career soared, he never forgot the easy camaraderie and spark he once shared with Erickson, a loss that haunted him quietly, shaping the way he approached every collaboration that followed. Another defining figure in Dick Van Dyke's life was Carl Reiner, the brilliant creator of The Dick Van Dyke Show. In many ways, Carl changed everything for Dick. Originally set to star in his own creation, Carl instead handed the lead role to Van Dyke just weeks before filming, a decision that propelled Dick into stardom. Yet, that gift came with an invisible leash. Carl maintained strict creative control, with every major decision passing through his hands, from script rewrites to casting choices to how tensions on set were handled. Despite being the face of the show, Van Dyke sometimes felt like a guest in someone else's vision. When conflicts arose, like the growing rift between Rose Marie and Mary Tyler Moore, Carl managed the disputes while Dick stayed on the sidelines, powerless to influence the direction of the show he was supposed to lead. Years later, when Van Dyke launched the new Dick Van Dyke Show, Carl returned as a consultant. But when CBS pushed back against controversial storylines, Carl quit abruptly, leaving Van Dyke to handle the fallout alone. It was another ending that carried both admiration and quiet resentment. Though they remained close friends, Dick never forgot what it felt like to lack control over his own creative destiny, and he carried that caution with him throughout his career. Of course, no discussion of Dick Van Dyke's life would be complete without Walt Disney, the man who gave him the iconic role of Bert in Mary Poppins. That whimsical chimney sweep with a twinkle in his eye would become one of Van Dyke's most beloved characters, forever cementing his place in film history. But behind the magic, the experience was far from seamless. Dick had to fight for a second role in the movie, even paying for his own screen test and removing his false teeth to appear older. He threw himself into the project wholeheartedly, but when it came to his infamous Cockney accent, he was set up to fail. With an Irish dialect coach who struggled as much as he did, and no one on set stepping in to correct it, Van Dyke was left exposed. After the film's release, critics tore into his accent for decades, and Disney never publicly defended him. To make matters worse, Van Dyke never received a paycheck for playing Bert, choosing instead to work for free out of pure belief in the project. While Mary Poppins became a phenomenon loved worldwide, the mockery and lack of support stung deeply, teaching Van Dyke a hard truth about Hollywood loyalty. It isn't always returned, no matter how much heart you give. Beyond the lights and cameras, away from the cheers of adoring fans, Dick Van Dyke faced his hardest battles alone. Fame brought pressures he never anticipated, and by his 30s, alcohol became a silent crutch. At first, it helped him loosen up socially, but soon it turned into a dangerous dependency. By the 1970s, his life was unraveling under the weight of addiction. In 1972, he checked himself into rehab, confronting the harsh reality that the man who made millions laugh was quietly drowning in his own pain. His marriage to Margie Willett deteriorated under the pressures of fame and personal struggles, and during that time, he entered a long-term affair with Michelle Triola. The divorce that followed at age 57 shattered the wholesome image the public had of him, filling him with guilt and self-reproach. Dick has spoken openly about the terror and shame he felt, looking in the mirror and seeing someone so far from the beloved character audiences adored. Yet, it's in this darkness that Van Dyke's resilience truly shined. Through brutal honesty and relentless determination, he fought for sobriety, wrote memoirs, and used his platform to support others facing similar battles. Even now, well into his 90s, he still smiles, dances, and performs, but behind every joyful step is a man who has walked through fire and emerged with scars the world rarely sees. When you piece these moments together, the silent yearning for Mary Tyler Moore, the fractured friendship with Rose Marie, the abandoned partnership with Phil Erickson, the complicated bond with Carl Reiner, the bittersweet experience with Walt Disney, and the grueling fight against addiction, a different portrait of Dick Van Dyke emerges. It's not the flawless entertainer frozen in Hollywood memory, but a deeply human figure marked by heartache, quiet betrayals, and unresolved regrets. Yet, what makes his story extraordinary isn't the pain itself, but his ability to keep moving forward, to bring joy to millions even when he struggled to find it for himself. His career is more than a collection of roles. It's a testament to courage and survival in an industry that often gives little in return. Despite the shadows, Dick Van Dyke remains a beacon of charm and resilience. His life reminds us that beneath the glitter of fame often lies a complex tapestry of personal struggles, mischances, and fragile bonds. And yet, through it all, he continues to make us laugh, proving that even the heaviest burdens can be carried with grace. If this deeper look into the untold side of Dick Van Dyke's life moved you, or made you see him in a new light, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. There are countless stories hidden behind Hollywood's brightest smiles, and together, we'll keep uncovering the truths that make these legends not just stars, but beautifully human.